This is what happens when you buy everything the internet calls Endgame. Every mouse, every monitor tier, every keyboard price range, $500 IMs. All of it on one desk. And what I found out is that most of it is a scam, but some of it genuinely changed how I play. And one category actually got worse when I spent more. In this video I'll walk you through every single category, show you the exact price where performance stops improving, and give you a method to check all of this yourself before you spend $1. And it all starts with a pattern that almost nobody talks about. So here is something I wish someone told me before I started spending. New gear excitement and new gear performance. Those two are completely different things, and it took me way too long to separate them. Now the moment that it clicked for me was somewhere around like mouse 30. A $180 mouse and a $60 mouse with the same sensor class gave me the exact same 3-day honeymoon, followed by the exact same reality. Day 1 feels incredible, day 4 feels like your setup, and if you check your stats, nothing moved. Of course, here is the exception where the tech is so good that you notice it right away. But for the other cases, that's when I stopped asking what feels better on day 1 and started asking what still feels different on day 30. And that filter killed almost everything on this desk. But not everything, so let me show you what survived. And first one is click technology. Now the Super Strike S2 has been my main for about 2 weeks now. It's not sponsored, I bought this myself, and I'll tell you what's wrong with it in a minute. It's the most noticeable upgrade I've felt in a mouse in years. I already made a full video breaking down the tech, so I won't repeat all of it again. But here is something I didn't expect. During game training, I kept hitting shots that my brain told me that I missed. Now I have like 10,000 hours of muscle memory on normal clicks, which trained me to know when I pulled back on a flick or like I was totally off target. I know that feeling, and with this mouse I get that feeling, and the kills still register somehow. Now my muscle memory is calibrated to mechanical clicks delay, and this thing is ahead of it. It's like the first gen tech, $180, so it's not really for everyone. But the gap is actually there, and for the first time seeing this for a Logitech tech, it's actually not placebo. Now second thing is OLED monitors. The refresh rate at this isn't really the point. For example, a 480Hz OLED has a frame persistence of about 2 milliseconds. That means roughly 2 pixels of motion blur per 1000 pixels of movement. An IPS in a similar refresh rate class has a real world pixel response of 4 to 6 milliseconds on most transitions, which is basically more blur despite similar hertz. That's why chasing refresh rate numbers without understanding pixel response is how people waste $1,000 on a monitor that looks worse than a cheaper one. Now OLED wins because the pixels turn off instantly, and this one thing matters most than anything on the box. Now 2 out of 3, but the third one is where I almost talked myself into spending way more than it was worth. Now I own the Linsul EM10 for about like $500, and they're genuinely the best thing I've put in my ears for gaming. Now here what the price gets you is a specific thing. In a match where you have like gunfires and footsteps happening at the same time, the EM10 lets you hear both clearly without one swallowing the other. At $80 those sounds might blend in. At almost $500 they separate, which is of course kinda logical because the price is like 3 times more. Of course, if you know how to do your EQ, you can get like a similar quality on cheap IMs, but the tech is still superior on the more expensive one. Now everything else on this desk is basically just like a lateral move. But this three came with problems nobody warned me about, and that's actually the part that cost me the most money. Now one of these problems is so common that most OLED owners have it right now and don't know what they're looking at. There are two types of OLED panels in gaming monitors. It's OLED and QD OLED, and both have a flaw that only shows up when your frame rate is unstable. On OLED your gamma shifts when your FPS drops. Dark areas get brighter mid-fight, and on QD OLED you get random brightness spikes at frame boundaries. Little flashes that look like the panel is flickering for no reason. Now both have anti-flicker modes, they help but they don't solve the problem. The real fix is stable high FPS. Now if your frames don't swing, the flicker barely triggers, which means your CPU matters just as much as the panel. Now people drop $1,000 on the monitor and then they realize they also need like another $400 on a CPU upgrade just to make the flicker stop. Now that's the hidden cost that nobody puts on a spec sheet. That's the monitor side, now the gear you actually hold. Now the Super Strike Click Tech is ahead of everything else right now, but the real story is what it does to the market. Every other company is still launching mice at like $140, $80, $200 even, with 8K polling rate hertz as like the main headline. That was their top tier innovation and it got outdated overnight. Now 20 grams heavier with better click tech beats 20 grams lighter with the same mechanical switches every time in my opinion, because at the end of the day we only care about performance, especially since this mouse is made mostly for competitive players. So a $160 mouse with 8K polling rate next to a $180 mouse with haptic induction clicks is embarrassing for the $160 one. The haptic feedback is kinda weird though. No real mechanical switch, simulated vibration. I got used to it immediately, but I know people who return it within a week because the click just like felt wrong. Now at $180 that's an expensive experiment if you land on the wrong side. Now premium IMs at this price come with things you should know about. For example, silver-plated cables oxidize from sweat. Balanced armature drivers are more sensitive to earwax than dynamic drivers. So wipe the cables after session, check filters every few weeks. 30 seconds, not like a deal breaker, but nobody mentioned it before you buy. Now I can live with all of that, maintenance is fair, but what actually made me angry is that at this price range they're still lying to your face, and it's a harder catch. Now this is the category that actually got worse when I spend more. Not the products, the marketing. At the budget level you expect bad marketing. $30 mouse, you know what you're kinda getting. But at the end game level you trust the numbers more because you're paying more. Now I had like two premium eyes. Same sensor on the spec sheet, same class tech MCU. I put both on the same class pad, one tracked perfectly, the other skipped on fast flicks. They have the same sensor, but it has different firmware handling the data. And tech wise, whenever you have problems with tracking on surfaces like glass, it means that the MCU and the sensor implementation is not really the best. Next we have monitors, 1 millisecond response time on the box, but it's on one single transition measured at an overdrive settings that creates artifacts worse than the blurred fixes. Now real average across all transitions at a usable setting is 3 to 6 milliseconds, and that's usually the base. And this will happen at like panels that are worth like $600 to $700, which are not cheap at all. Same thing on keyboards, 8000 Hz polling rate advertised. Now the USB side polls at like 8K, but the chip inside can scan the keys fast enough to fill that window. So your key press waits in a queue instead of being sent immediately. Now the spec is technically real, your experience isn't. So how do you catch it before you spend? Now before I buy anything I just do a quick search on Perplexity or Gemini, and I tell it to pull ready threads specifically. I'm not looking for day one impressions, I'm looking for people who owned it for 3 to 6 months on a setup similar to mine. That's where you find the real issues: cable oxidation, sound drift, tracking problems on a specific surface. All stuff that shows up after months, not days. And you will find none of it in day one YouTube reviews. For monitors I go to Arthings or TFT Central. Now both sides measure VRR flicks on the exact panel model. They also test overdrive at every setting and show you the real response time, not the marketing number. Now this data is free and it tells you more than any review because this site use lab equipment, not first impressions. For mice I look for someone who tested the exact mouse on the exact same surface that I use. If you just use like a normal cloth pad, you will not have a lot of problems. The problems start to appear when you use glass. So you have to check someone who also uses glass. Now for keyboards, I search the model plus latency and look for independent delay measurements. Once you have Hall effect with rapid trigger and a decent firmware, the gameplay difference between boards shrink dramatically. The jump from $30 to $80 matters, the jump from 80 to 200 is mostly build quality and sound, which doesn't really matter at all for competitive games. Now also if the brand doesn't publish firmware changelogs, you have no idea what you're buying long term. Also if you see no updates when it comes to the firmware changelog, that's also kind of a red flag. Now almost nobody does this, most people just like watch a review, get excited and order in the same day. 10 minutes of checking kills most bad purchases before they happen. But even after all of that, what are you actually looking for? Now Endgame isn't a product, it isn't a price tier, it's the moment you stop looking. Now the ceiling in almost every category is between $60 and $150. At that range you get flagship sensors, proper wireless, Hall effect switches, solid IMs. Now the competitive tools are all there. Monitors are the one exception though. Now the jump to OLED, it's like $1000 and it's a real jump in my opinion. But even there the difference between like a $1000 OLED and a $1500 OLED is like marginal. The ceiling of course still exists, it's just like higher in the category. But of course I'm not pretending any of it made me a better player. It made my experience feel better. That's a different thing. And the moment you understand the difference between those two, you actually stop wasting money. Now the real endgame is knowing exactly where your money stops buying performance and starts buying feelings. That line exists in every single category. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now let me know in the comments what's the most expensive piece of gear you bought that feels exactly the same after a week. And if you're interested in seeing my latest experiments, check out the next video.